This video about Brooklyn School architects is about the architect Montrose Morris, who was born in 1861. He lived till he was only 55 in 1916. Montrose grew up in Brooklyn. He was born on Long Island, but grew up in Brooklyn. And he is unique among all the Brooklyn School architects in that he actually lived in a house that he designed. I can't find any examples of anyone else who did. And what he did a lot of unique things, but one of the unique things he did was that he built this house in his 20s to be not only his home, but also his showroom for what he could build for potential clients. And it was one of a row of houses that he designed and built with a developer who was the same age as him. Both of them were in their mid-20s only, on Hancock Street in Bedford-Stuyvesant. So that was unique. And he designed apartment houses and a couple of hotels and numerous row houses or single-family detached houses. And he was very prolific. Some say there aren't as many examples of his houses and buildings as other architects. I don't think that's true. There's a lot of examples, and I'm looking forward to showing them to you. Here's 6 of his buildings that are still standing. Most of his buildings are still standing, and they are always eye-catching when you come across them. And he really had a unique style. I think he was the leading architect of the Brooklyn School. So this shows you a couple of apartment buildings, a couple of hotels. The one hotel, the Chatelaine Hotel, is no longer a hotel. It's a residence. It's an apartment building with, I believe, 80 some odd apartments. It was originally designed as, I believe, an apartment style hotel where people lived in regular apartments, but they took their meals downstairs in the dining room. And they had other amenities in the building, probably, I think, like a bowling alley was one of the things. And anyway, then he also designed a couple of hotels. I mentioned Le Chatelaine and then the Hotel St. George. He wasn't the only architect on the Hotel St. George. A lot of architects got involved. It was a huge, was a huge hotel in Brooklyn Heights. It's still standing, but it's now used as a dormitory for numerous colleges in Brooklyn. That's in Brooklyn Heights. Show a couple of mansions that he built. This one in the center bottom on Hancock Street, that is right down the street from where he had his own home. So this was the house on the corner, and I'll show that to you in a video clip upcoming. Then the Alhambra Apartments is probably like what his critics might view as his best work of all, and that's still standing, and I'll show you that to you. Now it has a retail component on the first floor, whereas originally it did not. So the retail kind of doesn't go with the architecture of the building, but you can still appreciate the overall building design. So there's numerous examples. I've taken a look at his houses. I tend to take a look at them for a while, so I'm going to include those full clips. So it might make it too long for one video, so I'll have to probably break it up into at least 2 parts, maybe 3 parts, to cover all of his work. Montrose Morris. I've been on this block before in Bedford-Stuyvesant. This is Hancock Street between Macon and Throop. And I was taken by the beauty of the houses throughout the neighborhood. I came here to see a specific house, which I'll show you when we get to the end of the block. And then doing my readings, I find that this block in particular is known for being where Montrose Morris designed many of the houses. A little further down the street as we head west on a beautiful mid-January day. We've had great weather in New York in 2021 in January, while everything else is falling apart, but it's been a beautiful month to look at architecture. So let me just see when his houses start. They're all beautiful. So even though some of these other houses, it's not known who the architects are, or it would require some deep research. I'm sure this is part of a historical district, so in that case, when they do designate certain blocks and neighborhoods as historic districts, they try to find out who the architect was on each of the houses. So let's see here. His buildings should be starting soon on both sides of the street. I can walk down the middle of the street because it's a pretty quiet street here. Hancock Street is. So I know that these houses here with the arches are definitely his. I'll get the addresses in just a second. I'm pretty sure that this complex with the one house in the middle under scaffolding is one of his. So that says 259. Yep, that's one of his. He has 255 through 259 on the north side of the street. Beautiful. And then he also did 236 through 252. So here's 252. And this house right here, it might look like a couple of brownstones put together, but it's actually one house. I did come to before to see, for another video I did on former President Grover Cleveland, who between his two terms, he served one term, then he was out of office, and he got back in as president, and he lived in New York City between his two terms in the late 1880s, early 1890s, and he came to his friend John Kelly's house here at 247 Hancock, and this house was built in the 1880s, so it was pretty new when he came here. And Grover Cleveland lived in Manhattan. He never lived in Brooklyn. So he had to get here somehow, either horse and buggy or taking the horse-drawn trams of the day. Maybe they started to become motor-powered. But I had noticed these houses when I came here to look at the John Kelly mansion, which, by the way, was sold not too long ago, like for $4 or $5 million. And I couldn't help but notice these houses, but I did not know they were Montrose Morris's, and now I do. And it's great to see them and focus on them.
Oh, 247 was described by one of the critics as a wonder. Somebody else might have called it a palazzo in Rome for a water meter magnet. The guy who had this house built, he was from Ireland originally, and he made his money on the water meter business when that was first starting. But I talk a little bit more about that in the Grover Cleveland video. And 238 was Montrose Morris's house, but I see a gap, and his house actually burned down in the 1970s, unfortunately. But the house to the left of this open space, I think, was a near copy of it. But inside it had a 2-story gallery where you could walk around the balustrade and look down. And he used the house, we'll look at 236 as if we're looking at his house. He used his house as like the model show house for what he could do. And you'd have advertisements for people to come, and he'd have open houses to look at his own house. And well, this actually says 232 here. So I know that his house, I've read, burned down, but I also have that his house was at 238. But this is also Montrose Morris, 232. Getting my addresses nailed down here. Here's 238 here. So, depending on the source, one source says that his house was this one, 238. Another source says that his house burned down and it was here. So who knows? These are people who really research this, but they could be a little off sometimes. You have to take it with a grain of salt and just appreciate the overall architecture for what it is. But another interesting thing about Montrose Morris is he was only like 24 years old when he designed and had some of these houses built, and he bought the land and built this set of houses and then sold them on spec. So that's pretty impressive. And I covered some of his other apartment buildings, and he worked with the same developer, Louis F. Seitz, and they were both 24, 25 years old. And then some of their later buildings, they were 29. I mean, they were very young to be getting involved in the real estate development and architecture business. But you could do things at an earlier age back then. So anyway, I hope you get a good picture of these houses here on Hancock Street, just east of Marcy Avenue, in the heart of Bed-Stuy. Montrose Morris. All these houses were built in the 1880s.